Well, yesterday, a Cook County, Illinois judge set his bond at $1 million. The R&B singer still hasn't posted that bond. And if we hear more about the story, of course, we'll update you on 11alive.com. But if he were to get bond and get out on bond, he would have had to surrender his passport, and he wouldn't be allowed to contact any of the witnesses or alleged victims in this case. He's also not allowed to contact anyone under the age of 18. Kelly's arraignment is set for March 8th. A young woman from Metro Atlanta was seen sitting in support of R. Kelly at his bond hearing yesterday, while the parents of Joycelyn Savage say that their daughter is being brainwashed by the singer, forced to be part of a sex cult. Their lawyer released a statement today saying they desperately want their daughter to come back home and that they're in fear of their lives. That statement read in part, in light of very serious death threats, which have all been reported to law enforcement, we will not travel to Chicago until we are confident that the Savages and I will not face harm of any kind. Therefore, we continue to press upon prosecutors in Cook County and also Fulton County for an independent meeting with Joycelyn Savage, apart from individuals associated with the defendant, Mr. R. Kelly. End of that statement there.